I'm Brad Harris, Smithtown Councilman and Town Historian, and I'd like to welcome you to this program on Smithtown's past and present. Through this program and others to follow, we will be developing the theme of Smithtown's growth and development. Smithtown, like the other towns in western Suffolk County, has experienced incredible growth over the last few decades. In just the last 75 years, the span of time of one man's lifetime, Smithtown has grown from a little rural town of 2,500 people to become the densely populated, bustling community of 117,000 people that it is today. This tremendous growth has had a profound impact upon the communities and the little hamlets that once made up this area. And through this program, I'd like to show you how Smithtown has changed with the passage of time. One community in Smithtown that has been greatly altered by the march of time is the little community of Head of the River, which once was located here where the Nessequag River flows under Jericho Turnpike. As I stand here today, it is hard to envision the fact that this area was once the commercial hub of Smithtown. Over there where you see the statue of Richard Smith's bull Whisper, once stood the Booth and Arthur store. It looked this way at the turn of the century. To the east of the store was a coal and lumber yard that was serviced by scows that were poled up and down the river carrying coal, lumber, and cordwood. Today there is no indication that any business ever existed on this side of the river. Just above the stores and homes that used to stand here where the bull stands today, used to be a house that was owned by the Gould family when this picture was made at the turn of the century. This home backed up on the Long Island Railroad tracks and trestle. Today, the Long Island Railroad still runs through this area and over this trestle as thousands of commuters make their daily trip from Smithtown to New York City. Of course, the trains of today are quite improved over those that existed at the turn of the century. At least I hope they are. Down below the trestle, right on Jericho Turnpike, is to be found this locksmith shop. But it wasn't always a locksmith shop. In fact, it used to be the post office for all of Smithtown. At the turn of the century, Smithtown's postmaster, E.L. Arthur, would take his daily mail for New York City and go up on the trestle, where he would hang a mail sack from a hook so that the train going into New York City could pick up the mail. The same trains coming out of New York City would bring the mail to this general locality. Of course, sometimes the sacks of mail missed the target and landed in the swamp or river below. We are told that the Smithtown postmaster kept a long pole handy to retrieve the sacks of mail. But then again, people were used to getting soggy mail. Next to the post office, where this tavern now stands today, another building once stood that has since disappeared. At the turn of the century, it was a business of some kind, and by the time automobiles began to make their appearances, it became the Smithtown Garage. Further to the east of the Smithtown Garage is to be found a little park, where there used to be a ford across the river. At the turn of the century, this ford was still actively used, even though an iron bridge crossed the Nessequag River at this point. It was still the age of the horse and buggy, and the ford offered easy access to the river, where a man could bring his horses for a drink. The river at this point was fresh water, good for swimming and trout fishing, and was a great attraction for local folk and tourists that visited this area. In fact, the tourists used to stay in Frank Freedy's Riverside Inn that once stood on the opposite bank of the river. This inn was famous on Long Island, and for tourists, it was the jumping-off spot for eastern Suffolk County. This was the last place on Long Island's North Shore where you could get a great lobster and steak dinner on the trip out to Long Island's East End. Many people remember this inn and restaurant, and it wasn't too long ago that it burned down. In fact, as you look around this immediate area today, you can see how vastly changed it is. The Riverside Inn is gone. The Smithtown Garage is gone. The Gould House has disappeared. And the Booth and Arthur store and the houses and businesses which once stood next to it are also gone. Except for the newer stores and homes that stand on the hill that rises toward Smithtown proper, there is little that remains to remind one of the fact that this area was once a thriving commercial center of Smithtown. However, if you leave this immediate vicinity and travel down this little path, you can travel back in time to a spot in head of the river that is much as it once was not so long ago. A few steps down Mill Dam Road, as this little path is known, and you immediately leave behind the sight and sound of the traffic roaring along Jericho Turnpike. The first house that you pass is this large yellow home that practically sits on Jericho Turnpike. In fact, on more than one occasion, the residents of this house have had unwelcome visitors as cars have crashed through their fence and landed in their backyard and hit the house. The house is historically very important to us. Known as the George Phillips House, it was constructed sometime before 1726. It was an early split-level house that was built into the hill and was used at times as a residence, a store, and a post office. In fact, it was Smithtown's first post office. The main street of the head of the river settlement passed by the door to the basement of this house, and it was here that mail was left by post riders and then later by stagecoach. The house was the home of the Phillips family, who also owned and operated a complex of mills that were established in this area. It was George Phillips who had the dam erected across the Nessequag River at this point, and he also erected on it a sawmill, a fulling mill, and a grist mill. These buildings can be seen in these postcards which were made of this area about the turn of the century. I'm now going to take you down into this area to show you what it looks like today. As we travel further down Mill Dam Path, an abandoned public thoroughfare which is now a private path, we pass some very large sycamore trees. These trees tower above you and have a circumference at their base of almost 20 feet. We think they were planted about the time that George Phillips built his home, and so are well over 250 years old. That makes them some of the largest sycamore trees on Long Island. As we go further along the path, which actually runs along the top of the dam across the river, we come to the first spot where water flows out of the dam. Just to the left of this little wooden bridge was where the sawmill used to stand. There's no indication of this today, since there are only bushes and brambles where the building once was. This sawmill supplied the lumber for many of the homes which were built in the area, and provided planks for ships that were built along the Nessequag River. We are not sure when the mill stopped operating, but it was still here at the turn of the century. I hope you have enjoyed this look at Head of the River community, and I invite you to join me next time as we look at another Smithtown community that has changed with the passage of time.